right, now I want to formalize this in a chart that contrasts Rand's account of egoism, right? She is, broadly speaking, in her advocacy of rational self-interest, advocating a type of egoism. It's very much true to the original spirit of kind of Aristotelian eudaimonism. But I want to put it in contrast to other codes of ethics that are also prevalent in the contemporary world. So I'm going to construct a chart here that will be a 3x4 chart, and let's put egoism right as one cell. And I want to contrast it to altruism. One of the striking things about Rand's moral philosophy is the vehemence of her opposition to altruism, and then a third theory, predation. And sometimes in the history of philosophy, the debate between moral codes is couched in terms of a debate between altruism and predatory, right, forms of acting. But there is, in the history of philosophy, an important third distinction that we're going to call the egoist position here. Now, if we're talking about characterizing codes of action, since we are conscious beings, what we do is consciously formulate, right, policies in various aspects of our life. We're trying to, since it's complex, say what's the appropriate policy to deal with all of the complexity and so forth. And one of the things that we attend to, right, as moral beings is the intent, right, of an action. So people do something, we say that it's good or bad, right, and so forth, but one of the things that makes an action good or bad is the intent that is behind it. Why did the person do it? What was motivating? What thoughts were they have? What were they trying to accomplish, right, and so forth. We also then will look at the action that is characteristically engaged in. We formulate policies of action. We should characteristically act this way as opposed to that way. We should strive in ourselves to formulate certain habits, right, of action. So what kinds of actions, right, characteristically are the right kinds? The action is usually a means to an end. We evaluate the consequences of actions. So the results of actions. So we have a certain intent in mind, we perform a certain action, and that consequence has, right, certain consequences. But consequences are typically complex because consequences are typically visited upon the person, right, who engaged in the action. What is the consequence of the action to myself? And we also will look at, particularly in clearly social context, the consequences of our actions to others. Right? So, for example, if we take a standard example, I go to a grocery store, I put some items in my cart, I go to the cash register, and then I give the person at the cash register some money. They give me a receipt, and I then take the food items out to my vehicle and take them home. All right, so why did I do that? Right? What was the action, right, that I engaged in? We described the various actions that are constituent of the overall process we call action. At the terminus of the action, what is the end of this transaction? What's the effect of my having gone shopping on me? And what's the effect of my having gone shopping on, say, the grocer or the people who own the grocery store? What's the effect on them? So those are four, right, important dimensions. What egoists will argue is that proper motivation, right, or intent is, right, self-interested. Right, my life is mine, right, your life is yours. We all have our particular interests in living our lives, right, a certain way. And so it's proper that we act, right, guided by the intent of achieving our various self-interests. What we should do when we're engaged in actions is engage in actions that are productive, right, of value, or creative, right? We are value creators, or we are producers, right, of values. And we should engage in actions that are, right, beneficial, right, improve our situation, right? As a result of the action, we're better off than they otherwise would be. If we're talking in a monetary context, it might be actions that are profitable, measured monetarily. And then with respect to other people, right, we should be engaging in actions that mutually respect their self-interest and so are mutually beneficial to them, right? And or if the person is not affected at all, right, just leaves them, right, neutral. Okay. So let me give you two examples. One, we'll just quickly revisit the grocery store example. In that case, I'm going to the grocery store because I need to eat, right? And also the people in my family, right, whom I value, they also need to eat. And so their eating is part of my broader self-interest here. But to keep it simple, suppose I were a single person, my goal here is to get food for me to eat. I have been a productive person, so I've got some money, right? And so I go to the grocery store and I give them money. As a result of that, I walk away, right, with a certain amount of food. That's beneficial to me. It's a net benefit to me because I would rather have the food than that amount of money. So I've given up the money, but the net benefit, or the net consequence rather, is benefit here. And then also the person with whom I transacted, right, has made a profit. In this case, the owner of the grocery store would rather have my money, right, than have that food sitting on his or her shelf. So that person has benefited here. Now this is then an example of what Rand would say is a morally, right, ideal, right, nexus, right, that we should strive for. And that egoism, right, is a matter of self-interested individuals being productive and then engaging in actions that benefit themselves to the extent that those actions involve interacting with other people. It's on a mutually beneficial basis, right? And of course, the other option is to engage in actions that are to your self-interest that just do not affect other people's legitimate interests as well. So, for example, I might, at the end of a long day of work, I'm tired, I go home and I want to relax, so I could pour myself a glass of wine, I go into my study, I turn on some music, and all of those actions are to my self-interest. I want to achieve a certain psychological and physical state for myself. I've engaged in the action, I've created my study, I've brought the food home, or I've put the music on, and the end result of my doing so is very beneficial to me. I enjoy the experience very much, but what's the effect of my listening to music in my study on you? Well, you're not affected by it. It leaves you neutral. My achieving my self-interest does not affect any of your legitimate interests. Now, by contrast, altruists and predators want to fill in the cells differently. If we flip over here, predation starts off by arguing that people should act in their self-interest. If we think of a standard predator, a person who is, say, a thief, the thief will say that he or she is motivated by self-interest, or his intent is to get self-interest, and will engage in an action that is a pure taking. Right? A thief does not add anything of value to the world. Instead, the thief's policy is to let other people do the productive work and then to be parasitical by taking it from them by fraud, right, or by force. The thief engages, if he or she does so successfully, right, the taking in an action, right, that is beneficial, right, to him, right, or her. But on the other hand, this person, right, the other people involved are sacrificed, right, or they suffer a loss, right? So I am a thief. I wait for you in a dark alley, or you walk by. I think I'm acting in my self-interest. I mug you. I take your wallet. I get away with it, hopefully successfully from my perspective. I'm better off, but you have suffered a sacrifice or loss. Now, people who live by a predatory code, and there are many of them, right, then are acting in a conscious policy fashion according to this nexus, right, of dimensions filled in, right, in a certain way. By contrast, altruists will often argue that their position is the opposite, right, of predation, and it certainly is the opposite of predation and also egoism, but they typically will take the predators, right, as their foil. And then what they'll argue is that the problem, right, with predation as a philosophy is the person putting their own self-interest first, and that if you are a moral person, right, your intent will be selflessness, and this is then meant literally, I will see myself as less important. Now, it might be other people, maybe other people in my family, right, are more important, or other people in my society, right, are more important. But in a respect, if we're talking about whose interests are most important, mine are secondary here. Here, the emphasis of altruism is on, right, giving, right. One should, to the extent that one has time, resources, monetary, right, or otherwise, give those resources to other people, since the self's interests are of less significance and the other, whoever the appropriate other is of more importance. One should be giving. This will, of course, require a sacrifice. It might be, if I have a certain amount of money, I could spend that money on myself and get a certain amount of pleasure out of it, but I give up that pleasure for the sake of the other person. And a willingness to engage in actions that are sacrificial or intentional losses is a mark of a consistent kind of altruism. And of course, the idea here is that other people will then benefit. Right? And so selfless, right, giving, and it's got to be a giving that is a sacrifice, right, for the benefit of others, is a characteristic type of altruism. Now, the point that Rand wants to make is that in many cases, when we look at the history of philosophy, there's a debate between whether one should be selfish, right, in the colloquial sense, and selfish is often then taken to mean living a predatory life in some degree or other, or whether selfishness is wrong and that the alternative then is, in principle, not to be self-interested, instead to act altruistically. Rand wants to argue that that's a false alternative. She has a different understanding of what is in the self's interest, what it takes in order to achieve it, and then a much more optimistic understanding of social relations. Interestingly here, the altruists and the predators, while they are opposite in many respects, both do have what is known as a zero-sum or win-lose understanding of the world. They will argue that the choice really is either I commit to sacrificing for your benefit, or I commit to sacrificing you, right, for my benefit. And so those are both pessimistic in the sense that they both rule out on principle the possibility of win-win social transactions. One's either a giver or a taker. On Rand's system, because she sees people as rational, productive people, she sees the possibility of beneficial, mutually beneficial, win-win social transactions as built into the nature of human dynamic. So as a matter of moral policy, Rand will argue for this position, and argue that both of these positions are immoral, right, in various degrees. This position obviously is immoral because you're sacrificing other people, right, against their will. You're not respecting their rights to live by their own lives. You're not respecting justly the value that they have added. Instead, you are living as a parasite on them. And altruism also is immoral in her system because you are not treating yourself justly, right, and fairly. You are a person of value. You have worth. This is your life. You should flourish and be happy. And any moral system that says the important thing for you to do is to sacrifice, right, your life, sacrifice your happiness, sacrifice the things that will be of value to you is, in principle, an immoral system. So rational self-interest, or shortened to egoism, is the moral philosophy. Now what this then will mean for us as parents, right, and educators is, as part of our moral education, in addition to the cognitive education, is to teach children, right, a proper sense of pride, right, to teach them the importance of honesty, keeping that reality-oriented, being committed to facts as important, to teach them that it's important for them to learn, right, as much as possible, to exercise their minds and develop their minds with the knowledge and understandings as much as they possible, that it's important for children to think for themselves, to act with integrity, to become productive people who treat themselves and other people justly. That is going to be a foundational part of moral education and a broader educational system as such.